Greetings, all. This is Rick Levine with your August astrological forecast. Before we get into the actual forecast, I have some business to take care of, including announcing the recipient of this month's free harmonics reading. These mini readings on the harmonic aspects in your chart are drawn every month from the email list. If you're not on the email list, you can go to www.ricklevineastrologer.com and sign up for the email list. I will not overwhelm you with marketing emails, nor will the list information be sold or shared with anyone else. However, you will get notifications of the various YouTube videos that I post, and also some other announcements throughout the month. But it will not be overwhelming, and you can always remove yourself from the email list should you choose to. This month's winner for the August reading is Lindsay Scher, and that number that was selected was 9445. Congratulations, Lindsay. You will receive an email from Gail, my assistant Gail, and we will follow that up with scheduling you for your free reading. First thing I want to mention is that Friday night, astrology night at Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington. This is also live streamed, and if you go to my channel, that is youtube.com/@Rick Levine, or the link that'll be down in the comments, down in the first pinned comment below. You can go to that and be notified when that begins. If you can't watch it while it's live streaming, you can always watch this later on during the month, because all astrology nights are not only live streamed, but also recorded and then kept on YouTube. That is Friday, August 1st at 6:30 p.m., and that is Pacific Daylight Time. The next thing I want to announce is a very exciting event. This is Kepler College's first symposium that they've held in many years, and this will be on September 5th through the 7th in Niagara Falls, New York. And many of the Kepler faculty will be teaching either short courses there or just doing lectures, whether you take them for credit or not. The link for that, again, like all the other links, is in the first pinned comment below. And I will be doing a master class at this conference called The Astrologer as Agent of Change. And also, I will be doing the keynote address at the conference called The Future of Astrology. And as many of you know, I was a founding trustee of Kepler College. And at this conference, I will share my perspective on the role of the astrological institutions of education in the 21st century. And also, I should just mention here that if you're not interested in hearing any of these events, you can always click right through to the beginning of the forecast. The link for that and every day for the month will be at the end of the description, and that is down below. Click on the description, then scroll to the bottom for the links to each day for the month, for the timestamps that will take you directly to that. The next event I want to mention is I will be teaching an ESAR masterclass. ESAR is the International Society for Astrological Research, and they have a master series workshop program that they offer. And on September 20th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, I will be teaching an introduction to the metaphysical dimensions of natal chart interpretation. As many of you know, one of my areas of not only research but practice has to do with harmonic aspects, which actually touch the nature of a chart that is not necessarily seen right away in the physical dimensions. This will be a 4-hour workshop to give you a flavor and a sense of what these harmonic aspects offer and how we can move outside of the physical realms into the metaphysical realms while doing natal chart interpretation. That's September 20th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Then on October 15th through the 19th, I will be participating in a conference that is put on by OPA, the Organization for Professional Astrology. And OPA runs a particular kind of conference where rather than going and getting lost in a crowd, you basically sign up for the conference and you choose one of the teachers that you then spend 3 days doing very, very intensive and individual work. There are a number of excellent astrologers that will be doing intensives, and also the OPA also offers a peer review process that is also being offered. But in each of the cases, you sign up for a track, and then you stick with that track in small groups of up to about 10 people working individually. And if you choose to work with me in particular, my track is entitled Improving Client Sessions Where the Planets Meet the Earth. And it basically is emphasizing client sessions as a process rather than as a performance by the astrologer. And we use the charts of all the class participants as the curriculum itself. Participants gain a fresh perspective that can be incorporated into their individual work, no matter what your skill level is, and regardless of what techniques you use, whether you're doing astrology professionally or, as an avocation. This is basically an interesting process with which you can spend 3 days working with me on individual charts and the charts of the people in the room to get a better understanding of how you might widen your perspective when doing chart work. That is October 15th to the 19th. And like everything else, the link will be down below. The last thing I want to mention today is that in November 20th through December 2nd, I will be offering again my initiation into astrology. This is a 10-11 day deep dive into astrology. It's important that you have some knowledge of astrology, even though it is an initiation. Over the years, we've had advanced students and even long-term practitioners, professionals in the course, but also beginners. And it's just important that you at least know the planet signs, houses, and just a basic understanding of aspects. But we do astrodrama, and we have music that kind of helps us understand the nature of the planets. We do movement. There is a lot of presentation lecture, and we do use the charts of the people again in the course, the participants, to help us understand the concepts that we are studying. This is held in the south end of Goa, India, Palolem Beach, at an Ayurvedic healing spa. It's a place where I've taught. This will be my 4th time teaching there. Short walk down to a magical and beautiful beach. And I look forward to seeing you there. There's a limited number of slots. I think we have about 25 people already, and we will cut this off at about 30 maximum. So if you're interested, you should pursue this now, because this will fill up, and there still is room available. That's Back to Goa, Initiation to Astrology, November 20th to December 2nd. And with that, we move into August. Let's start off right away looking at the chart for August 1st as we talk a little bit about the month ahead. Some months have like overwhelming particular aspects that define the month in its entirety. August is kind of a month of assimilation. And in some ways, I don't want to it's not a boring month, but in some ways, it's more of the same, meaning that we now have the shifts of the outer planets that have all occurred. And, we have Pluto that has moved into Aquarius, and it will not move back into Capricorn. So Pluto is at the beginning of Aquarius. We have Saturn and Neptune that have both entered into Aries, and both of them had been spending time in Pisces. Neptune for 14 years in Pisces, and Saturn for just a couple of 2.5 years in Pisces. And they've both now tipped into the sign of Aries, but they're just temporarily in Aries because they will each move back into Pisces over the days and weeks ahead. Saturn and Neptune are both now moving retrograde, and Saturn moving faster than Neptune will back up into Pisces on September 1st, and then move into Aries next February 13th, actually. Whereas Neptune backs up into Pisces on October 22nd, stays in Aries until then, retrograding slower than Saturn. And then it moves direct, and then it enters Aries again on January 26th. Now, Neptune moving into Aries on January 26th, this is 2026, and Saturn entering Aries on February 13th means that Saturn moving faster than Neptune will catch up, and they will align exactly on February 20th, 2026. Now, in July, we had them coming within a quarter of a degree of one another, and their conjunction is still impacting for the entire month of August, but the aspect is widening, and so the energy is kind of easing a little bit. But when Saturn, the planet of reality, of the status quo, of authority, lines up with Neptune, the planet of dreams, illusions, and idealism, it's hard to tell what's going on. It's hard to tell what's real, what's not real. We've been plagued with this concept of fake news for many years now, especially as for the last 14 years, as Neptune has been moving through its home sign of Pisces. But I think we're going to get a little bit of an easing off of this. But the energy isn't done, because it's going to come back with a wham next January into February. And then by March of 2026, we again will be moving into some new territory. But this month, we still have Saturn and Neptune both within a degree of each other, and they are still both moving through Aries. And so it still feels like that newness that has begun to hit us from the last couple of months over what are the issues of, what's going on. Where is reality? Where is imagination? Whether you're looking at this on the political front, where you're looking at it, there's so many ways to look at this. I'm not going to, dive into the specifics of politics right now. But obviously, when it comes to what's real and what's not, and how are we throwing up images and distractions and illusions to prevent us from seeing what's real? How do we curate our own realities with the internet, whether we realize we're doing it or not, and we are fed back that which we already believe? This is going to be more and more true over the months ahead. But I think we begin to get a little bit of clearing from this at this point in time. Now, into this, we also have Uranus, which has just moved into Gemini. It just moved into Gemini last month in July, and Uranus will stay in Gemini. It actually turns retrograde the beginning of September, and then backs into Taurus, where it was for the last 7 years on November 7th, and then, of course, in 2026, we'll have the push of Saturn and Neptune in Aries, and Uranus in Gemini, and all making exact sextiles and trines with Pluto in Aquarius. And this flavor is with us. We're kind of getting inklings. Last month was, I called last month a dress rehearsal for 2026. We're still in that energy. We're still getting a sense of something is pulling us into the future. And it's not what's going on in the present that is really the main game, although it sure feels like it. And it's very important that in the present moment, we take actions and we participate in a way to actually allow what we want to happen next spring and next summer to manifest. But all of this is going on now. As we can see at the beginning of August, we have Uranus making that trine with Pluto, and it's about 1.5 degrees of from being exact right now. And Uranus is pushing forward that, that aspect will tighten, and then it will become exact next summer. But we also have Saturn and Neptune both making sextiles to Uranus on one side and Pluto on the other. And this becomes an important feature for the month, especially as we see at the beginning of the month. We see Mars at 26, almost 27 degrees of Virgo. And it's really important to note that Mars will move into Libra on August 6th. And when Mars moves into Libra on August 6th, it will then make aspects with Uranus, Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto. In fact, Mars will move into Libra on August 6th, and on the 8th, it will make a trine with Uranus. On the 8th, later in the day, it'll make an opposition to Saturn. On the 9th, it'll make its opposition to Neptune. And then on the 10th, it'll make its trine to Pluto. This is going to be a very important truth-telling time where we're going to get a sense of where the longer picture is going. And I think that it's important to watch these days. We'll drill down on these again in just a few moments. But that's how Mars plays into this picture as Mars moves from Virgo and then through the first couple of degrees of air Libra, making a grand trine with Uranus in air Gemini and Pluto in air Aquarius, and at the same time from Libra to Aries, opposing the Saturn and Neptune conjunction in Aries. So this is an important part of the month. Let's take a look at some of the key features of August as we go through the month. We open the month with Venus actually making exact squares to Saturn and Neptune. This may feel a bit uncomfortable. We may be a bit disarmed here by whatever our illusions were that are kind of not playing through in the manner that we thought. In other words, when Venus squares Saturn, there's often a sense of wanting to be closer or more assertive or more seen or felt or heard in a relationship. But there's a sense of there can be a built-in loneliness to this aspect. And yet at the same time, Venus is also squaring Neptune. And I think that the combination between this Venus-Saturn square and Venus-Neptune square, which is really happening all within one day. In fact, the perfected Venus-Saturn is at 6:34 a.m., and the perfected square from Venus to Neptune is at 1:48 p.m. And in a way, this adds a sense of idealism and a lack of reality. But I think we can feel a bit disillusioned here. We may already be feeling that by the end of July, but there's this sense of kind of maybe even wanting to blame circumstances or blame others for something that doesn't feel right in our own life. And yet, I think the solution to this, or the remedy, maybe is a better word, is simply working on respecting ourselves and others based upon realistic expectations rather than something that was just an idealized dream that could never possibly, fall the way that, that we might have liked it to. By the way, on that same day, on the same day, on Friday, August 1st, Venus is also making a quincunx with Pluto. And there again, there's just some unsettled energy on this day. The Venus quincunx Pluto in some ways is kind of like an awkwardness that it's hard to find the right level of engagement. We may want to go deep and then find that that hurts and then pull back, or we may feel comfortable pulling back and then realizing that is not the solution either. And that's all on August 1st, by the way, with the moon in Scorpio, and that moon in Scorpio throughout the day is going to be harmonizing or trining with the Jupiter in Cancer. And so we do get emotionality kind of built into the day, and we'll just have to see how this all plays out. Um, and that moon trine Jupiter, by the way, is exact at 10:25 a.m. So that's just something to, and again, all times that I'm talking about are Pacific time as we move through the month. On August 2nd, midday, and of course, all of these charts are for noon, and these are all Aries rising charts, meaning that there's no ascendant or midheaven that we can rely on here, because ascendant and midheaven and houses are all dependent upon your local geography. And of course, we are all over or all around the globe. But by midday on August 2nd, we have the moon still in Scorpio. It enters Sagittarius at 11 p.m. So by the end of the day, by the beginning of the third, the moon is in Sagittarius. Also today, we have Mars making a quincunx with Chiron. Over the last couple of days, it's made a quincunx with Eris, and kind of now it finishes the energy. But once again, I think the beginning of August has some awkwardness to it. It doesn't feel easy. It may feel like we've run into some situation where we want to fix it, we want to heal something, but it's not going to be all that easy. I think the energy does ease up as Mars moves into Libra by the 6th, 7th, and 8th, and picks up on those trines that I talked about earlier. But that's on August 2nd. On August 3rd, there's no outer planet or no planetary aspects. However, we can see that as Mars is inching towards 0 degrees of Libra, it's getting closer and closer to those trines that it will make over the next few days to Uranus and to Pluto. In fact, midday on Sunday, August 3rd, Mars is actually less than 3 degrees trine Uranus, and just about 4 degrees trining Pluto. But what's important to understand here is that Uranus to Pluto is actually less than 1.5 degrees. So we're definitely getting this energy from this grand trine. And in fact, if we add the Saturn-Neptune back into the mix, this becomes a kite, and that Saturn-Neptune, kind of in its opposition from Mars, shows a way out of that equilateral, self-sufficient, kind of self-referential triangle, grand trine of Mars and Uranus and Pluto. That's on August 3rd. We can also see on the 3rd that the moon, having moved into Sagittarius, is going to pick up on trines to Saturn and Neptune very early in the morning. And in fact, it will trine Mercury later in the day, midday of 1 p.m., and then eventually pick up on a trine to the sun in Leo by 12 p.m. on the 3rd. And as we move to the 4th, again, there's no major aspects here. We do have the moon having moved through the latter into the latter degrees of Sagittarius, is kind of past its easy energies to the other fire signs. It's past all those trines, but the 4th is kind of a quiet day. Nevertheless, Mars at now over 28.5 degrees of Virgo is getting closer and closer to that whole kite pattern that we talked about earlier. August 5th, again, no specific aspects. There's it's a relatively quiet day, although the moon moves into Capricorn, 10:04 a.m. And as the moon moves into Capricorn, it's going to pick up on squares to the Saturn and Neptune. And that's going to be midday, 1 o'clock, between 1 and 2 o'clock. And then by later in the evening, it'll oppose Venus. So the moon in Capricorn might put a more serious tilt onto things. But that's all on August 5th. And now we get to August 6th, and we can see that at noon, the Mars is at 29 degrees of Virgo and 53 minutes. But actually, Mars moves into Libra at 4:23 p.m. today on August 6th. And this becomes the beginning of, I think, what becomes like a tick, like I don't mean like a nervous tick or a tick that could bite you and give you Lyme disease. I mean like tick of a clock, tick tock, that Mars as it ticks on into Libra kind of makes the connection by sign in the grand air trine from Libra to Aquarius to Gemini, and then the opposition to the Saturn and Neptune. We will see that more of that over the next couple of days. But meanwhile, we have the sun at mid Leo by the 7th. The sun makes an exact half square to Mars, and it's coming into a square and a half to both Saturn and Neptune, as Mars is coming into the opposition to Saturn and Neptune. This is a very dynamic period of time because we're also getting energy from that building grand trine of Mars and Pluto and Uranus. But at the same time, Mars opposite coming into that opposition to Saturn, which is exact tomorrow. Let's move here to the oh, and by the way, here on the 7th, we also have the moon moving from Capricorn into Aquarius at 6:18 p.m. This is on August 7th. And as the moon moves into Aquarius, it's going to trine Mars and trine Uranus, and then sextile Saturn and Neptune all through the evening hours here on the 7th. And that actually can create some real flow of energy, some real release, but it's also conjoining Pluto. So it's not a lighthearted energy. This is a profound and powerful uncovering, the true meaning of the word apocalypse. Something is uncovered. And this happens on August 7th in the evening. But as we move to the 8th, we can see that the moon is past the conjunction to Pluto by then. But now we have here on the 8th, we have the exact sesqui-square from the sun to Saturn. Yesterday it was semi-square to Mars. And this is the sun basically, the shining of the light is creating a real problem for what the energy that's Mars has to do with its opposition to Saturn. That's the law, that's the rule, that's the authority. And Neptune, how we've been fooled or how we've deceived ourselves, or the dream that we thought was real. There's some real powerful stuff going on here, and, in this period of time of August 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. But on the 8th, Saturn, the Mars also makes its exact trine to Uranus, and that's just before noon at 11:44 a.m. And then it makes its opposition to Saturn at 7:52 p.m. And then it'll make its opposition to Neptune tomorrow on August 9th. Let's move this to the 9th. Saturday, August 9th, we have a full moon in Aquarius. Now, this full moon in Aquarius occurs at 12:55 a.m., and that's Pacific Daylight Time, but it's incredibly close to the exact Mars-Saturn opposition that I'll say more about in just a minute. The actual moon's opposition to the sun is an outwardly shining, bright Leo. The sun loves being in Leo. It's at home in Leo. And the moon in Aquarius is kind of far away, not as far as it can get, but far away from its home sign in Cancer. The moon in Aquarius may feel a little bit disenfranchised. The motions are harder to find because the moon in Aquarius likes conceptualization. It likes the thinking process of ideas and concepts. The full moon is making that half square to Saturn and square and a half to Mars. That is also being fed by the sun. I'll have more to say on that in just a moment. But I think that this full moon largely is a gentle full moon, even though it's in an environment where there's so much going on that doesn't connect exactly to the full moon itself. And now we can see that today on Saturday, August 9th, that Mars at noon is 1 degree 45 minutes of Libra. It's past its exact opposition to Saturn, but it's still coming into an almost exactly opposed Neptune that occurs at 3:13 p.m. And it's coming into its trine to Pluto today on August 9th at noon. The Mars trine Pluto is less than a half a degree from being exact, but all of this is being washed into one hum, into one vibration of this kite, which is a grand trine from Mars to Uranus to Pluto, with the Saturn-Neptune at what we call the apex or opposition point of that kite, making sextiles to Pluto on one side and Uranus on the other. And that Saturn Neptune conjunction at 1 degree of Aries acts as the release point to all of this. And so something here is really stirring. This is a very strong and powerful pattern. And we still have some residual from the sun, having made that half square to Mars and square and a half to Saturn and Neptune yesterday. But all of this is still very, very dynamic, and all of it is certainly profound. Now, one thing that we didn't mention, or I didn't mention at the beginning of the month, is that Mercury had turned retrograde on July 17th at 15 degrees of Leo, and it's backed up all the way to 4 degrees of Leo. And here on the 9th, Mercury actually is just coming into its station. Its station's direct on the 11th, meaning that Mercury is barely moving now. If we move from the 9th to the 10th, we can see Mercury has barely moved at all. It's moved from 4 degrees 23 minutes to 4 degrees and 16 minutes. And in fact, and we can see that the moon is also moved into Pisces. The moon entered Pisces on the evening of the 9th at 11:50 p.m. I shouldn't say on the evening, it's really late at night. And here on August 10th, we can see that the moon is at 6 degrees of Pisces. But we can also see now how exact this grand trine is, with Mars on the 10th, making its exact trine to Pluto, and also having just moved a little bit past its trine to Uranus and a little bit past its opposition to Saturn and Neptune. But all of these are still in play. So these are very dynamic days where a lot of energy is flowing, a lot of things are happening. As we move to the 11th, now we can see that Mercury has backed up again, but not very much. It's only backed up a few minutes of arc. On the 10th, it was at 4 degrees and 16 minutes at noon. Today, it's 4 degrees and 16 minutes, still the same. It's barely moved at all. In fact, it'll take another day or two for us to see any real forward movement. But this is the end of that Mercury retrograde that began back in mid-July, and that may have intensified a lot of communication. Felt like there were a lot of things that we were revisiting, reviewing, the RE words are all Mercury retrograde type words. And as Mercury begins moving direct, it's going to move through an area of the sky from 4 degrees of Leo to about 15.5 degrees of Leo, where it's already been going forward and then retrograde, and now for the third time direct. So anybody who has planets between, let's say, 4 and 15 degrees of a fixed sign of Leo or Aquarius or Scorpio or Taurus is going to get those Mercury squares and or conjunction or opposition again and again and again. And for those who have planets between 4 and 15 degrees of a fire sign, Leo, Sagittarius, or Aries, that those Mercury, this Mercury direct will actually, for the third and final time, highlight some of that energies, maybe in a more positive and flowing way. But that Mercury turning direct at 12:29 a.m. on Monday, August 11th, is going to take a while to move forward. And once it does move forward, it's not going to move out of its shadow. In other words, that's the place where it reached direct before it began turning retrograde in mid-July. And by August 25th, Mercury will be moving into new territory. And so even though our communication, our intellect, our thinking is once again loosened up and beginning to move forward, it still may feel like we're covering ground that we've already covered once or even twice before. Also, on August 11th, we have another important aspect that is, I kind of have mentioned it, but not as an isolated aspect. And that is, we've talked about the Saturn and Neptune making sextiles with Pluto on one side and Uranus on the other. Well, today on August 11th, Saturn makes its exact sextile, its retrograde sextile. This is the second out of 3 sextiles that it'll make. And this gives us the ability to give real structure, Saturn, to those things which feel unstable, Uranus. Rob Hand says that Saturn and Uranus together, Saturn's like an immovable object, and Uranus is like an irrepressible force. And so something's got to change. That's Uranus, but it's meeting something that won't change. That's Saturn. It's almost like the new way, the radical thinking, the rebellion. Uranus is meeting Saturn, the authority, the structure, the conservative. And yet here, because it's a sextile, it indicates that there can be some loosening of that energy, especially because today we also have Venus making an exact conjunction with Jupiter. You know, Venus and Jupiter are considered to be the benefics. They're the easier 2 planets compared to Saturn and Mars to work with. And we've been working with a difficult, Mars, the anger, the aggression, the assertion, kind of confronting or being confronted by a wall of authority or resistance. Saturn, over the past couple of days, as Mars moved into Libra and opposed Saturn, and of course Neptune also, and of course made all of those grand trines. But Venus meeting up with Jupiter is kind of sweet. It's pleasure. It's easier. It's, Venus is sweetness, and Jupiter is more. And of course, too much of anything is not necessarily good. Hippocrates, yeah. Hippocrates said that any tonic in excess is toxic. And we have to be careful today on and around August 11th of taking anything too much or too far, or being overindulgent or overexpending or being over extravagant. This is all on August 11th. Incidentally, the moon on August 11th goes through toward the end of Pisces, and by the beginning of the day on August 12th, as we get to August 12th, the moon is in Aries. The moon actually moves into Aries at 3:32 a.m. this morning on Tuesday, August 12th. We still have, all of this grand trine energy still in effect, although it's beginning to weaken. We still have the Saturn that's making that retrograde sextile to Uranus. Even Neptune is also in that picture. but the on the 12th, there's no exact outer planet aspects. Nevertheless, as the moon moves into Aries early this morning, it will immediately or nearly immediately join up with Saturn at about 5:30 this morning, and then make sextiles with Uranus in conjunctions with Neptune, and sextile to Pluto and oppose Mars. It's an active day for the moon this morning, and it may stir up again some of those things that have been cooking over the last several days. That is on August 12th. As we get to August 13th, we have Venus that's kind of inched along away from Jupiter. Jupiter will follow into this aspect, but Venus makes a half square with Uranus. Remember, half squares are not weaker than squares. They just have a narrower area of action. And often half squares are quite motivational. And Venus, the planet of attraction and desire and love and sweetness in Cancer, wants safety, it wants security, it wants to feel protected, or wants to protect those it loves. And Venus is still lined up, still very closely conjoined with Jupiter. In fact, it's like maybe a degree and a half away from Jupiter today. But as it makes that half square with Uranus, there's this sense of kind of suddenly being attracted or awakened by other possibilities. Something comes in that can be very exciting, but it can also be a bit disruptive. And we have to remember that when Venus and Uranus connect up in whatever way they do, especially by a half square, it doesn't mean that we need to do anything about it. We can just observe it. We can enjoy it. We can talk about it. But whether or not we act on the impulsive desires, that depends upon our free will, not just upon our unconscious reaction. We can actually infringe our desires or our long-term considerations on what our impulsive desires or likes or fantasies are. So that is on the 13th that Venus makes that half square with Uranus. But also notice that Mercury has come very, very close to being sextile to Mars. And that is exact, because right now Mars is still moving faster than Mercury, because Mercury, just having come out of its retrograde, is still crawling very slowly direct. And as we move from the 13th to the 14th, we can actually see at noon on the 14th that Mercury and Mars are incredibly close. In fact, by degree, Mercury at 4 degrees 57 minutes Leo, and Mars at 4 degrees and 54 minutes of Libra, and that they will make that exact sextile at 7:04 p.m. On Thursday the 14th. And this denotes a flow from our communication Mercury in Leo, saying something in a dramatic or maybe even bold way, harmonizing with Mars having moved into Libra. Mars in Libra is far away from its home sign in Aries. And yet Mars in Libra can be very effective if it can be effective as the diplomat, as the go-between, as the therapist, as the kind of mediator, if and only if that Mars can see both sides of an issue. If Mars is hung up in one side of an issue, it won't work out. But with that Mercury making that exact sextile in the evening on the 14th, we can imagine that there will be a flow of energy, and that it will in some way make sense or allow us to communicate that which we need to communicate, and say it in a way that is acceptable and not necessarily offensive. Now, at the same time, we also have the moon moving into, this is still on the 14th, we have the moon moving into Taurus at 6:21 a.m. And as the moon moves into Taurus, it's going to make a square to Pluto. And so there may be this can occur, while we're sleeping, depending upon where we are. But that moon moving into Taurus can give us a little bit of a sense of obstinance, a sense of stubbornness. We may not want to give up our perspective in order to include someone else, even though Mars in Libra suggests that if we can widen our perspective, it will be better for everyone involved. Here on August 15th, we can see that there's no major outer planet activity, but the moon is coming towards its third quarter square to the sun. That occurs at 10:12 p.m. And that just can be another little blip. It's an emotional discomfort, uncomfort. We have to let something go. We may have a bit of a crisis of some sort, but it's not necessarily something that we have to act out. It's often something that happens internally, and that is on the 15th. Moving to the 16th, again, it's a day where there's no exact planetary action. We do have Mercury coming into that sextile to Mars that is exact again. This is kind of a weird thing because we had this exact aspect 2 days ago on the 14th when Mercury made its sextile to Mars. But Mercury is picking up speed, and Mars was going faster than Mercury, and now Mercury is going faster than Mars. And so that sextile from Mercury to Mars has really been with us from the 13th, 14th, exact 15th, seeming like it was getting wider, but then on the 16th, it's back to being exact again. It's a very peculiar astrological moment that really gives power to saying things out loud, saying it was that out loud and proud. It's bold. It's Mercury in Leo, but we have to keep in mind that Mars in Libra is always going to need to be aware of the other side of the coin, the self versus the other point of view, if it's going to be as effective as it can be. Also, the moon moved into Gemini, or moves into Gemini this morning, August 16th, at 9 a.m. And as it does, it will immediately, it'll move into Gemini. It'll make a sextile with Saturn. It moves into Gemini at 9 a.m. today on the 16th. It'll make a sextile with Saturn by 10:38 a.m. And then it'll join up with Uranus. It'll conjunct Uranus at 11:11 a.m. And then it'll sextile Neptune at 11:54 a.m., trine Pluto at 12:31 a.m., and eventually trine Mars by 7:47 p.m. this evening. What this means is that this weakening or spreading grand trine that was exact a few days ago from Mars to Pluto to Uranus with its opposition to Saturn and Neptune is now being brought back into focus as the moon kind of connects all of these energies in like one whoosh over a few hours, kind of bringing it all back into our, into our face, so to speak. It's like we can't get rid of it. In fact, this whole thing ends by 7:47 p.m. this evening when the moon makes a sextile with Mercury, and it's trine to Mars, 7:33 p.m. and 7:47 p.m. respectively. So this is an interesting day where there's not a lot of outer planet. There's no real planet activity, except the moon is making connections through all of those planets that we've already spoken about. On the 17th, again, we have that exact sextile between Mercury and Mars. It doesn't seem to want to go away. It's like the 14th, the 16th, right into the 17th. The moon moving through mid-Gemini on the 17th. As we get to the 18th, the moon will move into Cancer at 12:05 p.m. Here at noon on the 18th, we can see that the moon is at 29 degrees Gemini, 57 minutes. We also note that the Uranus sextile to Neptune is about 1/3 of a degree from exact. That's the Uranus to Neptune. The Uranus to Pluto is less than 3/4 of a degree. And so this whole Uranus trine Pluto, less than 3/4 of a degree. The Saturn and Neptune sextile Pluto on one side and sextile the Uranus on the other. That is not going away. But also here on the 17th, 18th, and 19th, we're getting, actually it's exact on the 18th and 19th, we're getting the sun making a trine to Eris and a trine to Chiron, suggesting that our words can actually create, and actions can actually create some healing. We can actually bring some remedy, some soothing energy to these deep wounds that we've been dealing with, that have been plaguing us, I'd say for weeks, for months, okay, maybe for centuries. But we have an opportunity here in mid-August to do some real healing activities, I believe. That's on the 18th. And into the 19th, because when we get to the 19th, the sun is now exactly trining Chiron, allowing that healing to take place. On the 19th, we also have the moon moving through Cancer, catching up with Jupiter. The moon conjoins with Jupiter at 3:02 p.m. And this certainly can be, again, a replay of how much is enough or too much. There's some optimism here, some confidence that comes into the picture. That's on the 19th. On the 20th, again, no outer planet aspects, but we have the moon now lining up with Venus at the beginning of the day, or early this morning at 5:27 a.m. And then at 4:16 p.m., the moon moves from Cancer into Leo, and then the action picks up again. I think there's some energy here that begins to kind of go out into the open. As the moon moves into Leo, it's making trines with Saturn, sextiles with Uranus, trines with Neptune, and opposing Pluto all through the afternoon and into the early evening. That's Pacific time, of course, on the West Coast. But the moon's entry into Leo, I think, is going to really stir up some energy. And it's energy, I think, that if we're willing to look at things deeply, because the moon is opposing Pluto, I think that this can be a real smooth and wonderful transition. We'll see how this one plays out. That is on the 20th. On the 21st, Venus now makes a square with Eris, and it's going to be making a square with Venus is going to be making a square here with Eris on the 21st, and a square with Chiron on the 22nd. You remember Eris and Chiron are still pretty close together. They're both retrograding now. Chiron will retrograde back into the second of 3 conjunctions that it will make with Eris. But right now, as Venus is squaring both of them, it's almost like the progress that we may have made the last couple of days from the sun's trine to Eris and Chiron are now kind of being stirred back up in some way. This is a bit of, this doesn't feel as good as we thought it might. And as the moon moves by the 21st through the latter degrees of Leo, I mean, the moon is going to, on the 21st, it'll conjoin Mercury by midday, actually, I think by 11 on the 21st, the moon will conjoin Mercury at 11:13 a.m. But as we get closer and closer to the end of the day, we can see that the sun is moving from Leo into Virgo, and the sun's shift from Leo into Virgo occurs on August 22nd at 1:33 p.m. Let's move this ahead to the 22nd. And you can see here that the sun now is at 29 degrees and 56 minutes of Leo. The moon at noon on the 22nd is at 24 degrees and 20 minutes of Leo. So we can see that we're coming into a new moon, and this all happens pretty intensely, all piled up around the same time, because we have the sun that moves into Virgo at 1:33 p.m. And then we have the moon that moves into Virgo at 10:24 p.m. And then by 11:06 p.m., we have the new moon in Virgo. The sun and moon are here in Leo at noon. But if we move this to 11:06 p.m., we can see that the moon and the sun are both at 0 degrees of Virgo and 23 minutes. And this new moon is potent. It's potent because it's square to Uranus, and it's quincunx to Saturn and Neptune, and it's also quincunx to Pluto, making it the apex on a yod, which is a Pluto sextile to Saturn-Neptune, and that sextile is their midpoint is opposite the new moon. And so that new moon becomes the point of the apex. It points to that direction. And this is suggesting that we need to control our energies. We need to be gentle here. Gentle maybe isn't the right word. We need to be effective. We need to be efficient. That new moon in Virgo is squaring Uranus. It suggests that if we react too quickly, we can be quite disruptive. But here's the other thing that is really interesting or intriguing in this, and that is that the new moon square to Uranus is actually being exacerbated, stimulated by Jupiter, which is making a half square to Uranus on one side. That's not technically exact until tomorrow. And it's making a half square from the sun and the moon, the sun to Jupiter on the other side. That's also not exact until 2 days, until the 24th. But the moon sweeps through that pretty quickly. And so we have this issue here where I think the danger here is overreacting, is over expressing. And yet in Virgo, that new moon says that if you can hold that energy, if you can be exact, if you can act in a very high level, high and finite way, and not try to take on too much all at once, this can be a very powerful and very effective new moon. But I think the danger here is that Jupiter semi-square, half square to Uranus, half square to the new moon, and the new moon square to Uranus. We have to be very careful about overreacting, because there is an erraticness, there's a stubbornness, there's kind of this impulsivity to want to do things our own way. And I think that can ultimately get us into trouble. So it's a very strong, very powerful, and not an easy new moon on the 22nd. And that is at 11:06 p.m. We can see here on the 23rd that the sun is making an exact quincunx to Saturn. And then on the 24th, this is on the 23rd now, on Saturday. On the 24th, the sun will make those exact quincunxes to Neptune and to Pluto. The moon on the 23rd is midday, is still moving through Virgo. But when we get to the 24th, we can see that by midday, the sun is at the same degree, 1 degree of Virgo, quincunx Pluto at 1 degree of Aquarius, quincunx Neptune at 1 degree of Aries, and exactly square Uranus at 1 degree of Gemini. This is not a comfortable day. although these days are all mixed energies. They're complicated. We also have Venus, which has recently made squares to Eris and to Chiron. Venus, as it's getting closer and closer to moving into Leo, it does that tomorrow on the 25th. Venus will come in opposition to Pluto. We also note that the moon at 20 degrees of Virgo on the 25th will actually move, it will actually enter Libra at 7:08 a.m. tomorrow on the 25th. So we're going to move this ahead to the 25th. And we see now the moon midday is at 2.5 degrees of Libra. And here on the 25th, we also see that Venus is now actually moved from out of Cancer into Leo. We now have Mercury and Venus in Leo, but interestingly, the sun is all the way ahead in Virgo, kind of putting a winding down energy to summer. Meanwhile, our intellect, our communication, mid-Leo. Mercury here has just moved out of its shadow. It does that today because remember, Mercury had already moved to 15.5 degrees before it turned retrograde on July 17th. Now Mercury's moving into new territory. And on the same day, Venus moves into Leo. Man, things are popping. This is like the energy is really exploding and things are really happening on the outside. That Mercury is also making a square and a half to Neptune. Venus is making a trine to Saturn as it enters Leo and coming into its opposition to Pluto. That's exact on the 26th tomorrow. We have Venus is also coming into a sextile with Uranus. That's exact also tomorrow on the 26th. And it's trine to Neptune at 3:18 tomorrow. Let's move this ahead to the 26th. And we can see that on the 26th, the moon will actually join up with Mars. That's at 7:25 in the morning. But the moon is at mid-Libra by midday on the 26th. But man, Venus now is coming into the opposition to Pluto. That's exact today on the 26th at 10:53 p.m. Venus is exactly trine Neptune at 3:18 p.m. Venus is exactly sextile Uranus at 1:57, just about 2 p.m. And of course, Venus trined Saturn late yesterday at 5:55, yesterday afternoon at 6 p.m. Venus right now is in the crosshairs of everything. Very, very profound. And it's basically expressing what it wants, expressing what it likes in Leo, even if it's revealing some stuff of Pluto that has still been hidden or is trying to be hid in some ways. Things might still be coming out into the open. This is all on the 26th, a dynamic day. On the 27th at noon, we can see that the moon is at 26 degrees of Libra, which means that the moon will actually move from Libra to Scorpio here on the 27th. The 27th, the moon moves into Scorpio at 6:27 p.m. And as it does by 10 o'clock this evening, the moon, and then early tomorrow morning, the moon is going to square Pluto and then square Venus. And so this is still another round of dynamic energy on the 27th, but there's no exact outer planet aspects occurring, although I would note that Uranus is now within 2 minutes of arc sextiling Neptune. And that is actually exact tomorrow. These are slow moving energies, but Neptune retrograding back through that sextile to Uranus, Saturn having already done that. Saturn moved through that same aspect back on August 11th. This is really allowing us to break through into new ground. Even though these planets are all retrograde, there's something very familiar. It's like we've been here before, but somehow they're showing up as something new, something different. This is on August 27th. August 28th, again, there's no exact outer planet activity, except that the Uranus sextile to Neptune on the 28th is exact. And that's exact at 5:14 p.m. But really, this is such a slow moving energy that we've been feeling it for days. We'll feel it still for days. But this is about social change. This is about the Uranus, the rebellion, the radical shift, the new, and Neptune, these and Saturn. This is about changes happening that maybe not necessarily even within normal government channels, but there's something happening here on the outside that's really working this energy up. This is on August 28th. 29th, again, from an outer planet standpoint, relatively quiet. The moon here on the 29th moving through Scorpio. It does make a trine with Jupiter early this morning at 5:38 a.m. and then a square to Mercury at 5:47 p.m. It's almost like it's like we can feel good with that moon trining Jupiter, but as it squares Mercury, someone says something that maybe we don't like or is uncomfortable, or we feel something that doesn't sit with us right. And yet we can also see that the Uranus trine to Neptune is still, I mean, all of these are still, the Uranus, Pluto, Saturn, Neptune trines and sextiles are still operative. They're all so close, but the Uranus to Neptune is only at midday 1 minute, 1/60th of a degree from being exact as it was exact yesterday. That's on August 29th. So there's some really deep changes that are occurring maybe beneath the surface that I think are very, very powerful, very profound, and will take time to play on through. By August 30th, the moon has moved into Sagittarius. The moon moves into Sagittarius at 7:04 this morning. And as it does, by 7:18, it'll trine Saturn, and then it'll trine Neptune, oppose Uranus. It basically activates those same planets. It'll trine Saturn and Neptune. It'll oppose Uranus. It'll sextile Pluto. And again, the moon in Sagittarius is going to be uplifting. It's going to give us some hope. It's going to give us somewhere to go. We also have Mercury moving into trines with both Eris and Chiron that are exact today and tomorrow, which is really where we end the month. And I would like to suggest that we end the month on a high note. We'll see how this all plays through. But there's a lot of motion going on in August. And I think more than ever, there's stuff that's happening that's not exactly creating outer events. I'm not saying there won't be any major outer events. I mean, there's just been one thing after another after another. But as we move here, even to August 31st, we can see that Mercury now is exactly trining Chiron after trining Eris yesterday. And the moon in mid Sagittarius has already moved past its connections with all of the fiery energy of the trines to the Saturn and Neptune and so on. But I think that we end the month on a note of optimism, that the communication can actually, if we use it correctly, can create some important breakthroughs and changes that as we get through to the beginning of September, that as Mars moves into that exact half square, Mars moves into an exact square and a half with Uranus, and then Jupiter Mars moves into a square to Jupiter. There's a lot of energy that begins to get stirred up as we move through the first week of September, and we will cover that in the September forecast. That's it for the month. It's there's a lot going on this month. And yet I think that a lot of the month is really about assimilating. It's almost like even the new things that come up this month are things that we already know are in process, things that we've seen developing. Things are developing and assimilating and progressing, and we'll just have to see how they all move along, because none of this is over yet, because all of this is coming to a culmination next February, March, April, May, June, July. And that's when these times will actually come to fruition. That's it for now. Think cosmically, act locally, take care of those things that are close to home, because it is the work that we each do individually in our own lives and our own relationships, with our parents, our children, our siblings, our loved ones, our enemies, people we don't know. That's where the biggest changes will ultimately come from, are from the littlest changes that we make every day in our lives. That's it for now. See you next month. I'm Rick Levine. Peace out.